It was supposed to be an easy conversation, the kind that usually slides by without a single ripple, but instead it turned into one of the most jaw-dropping moments daytime television has ever seen. When a legendary action star walked into a studio expecting polite questions and movie talk, no one imagined it would spiral into a confrontation so intense that it left millions staring at their screens in disbelief. Before we dive into the video, please like, subscribe, and comment. Now let's get back to the video. The studio was alive with its usual buzz as cameras locked into position and producers counted down to air. The familiar set felt calm on the surface, but there was an edge in the air that hinted something was off. Joy Behar sat at the table, flipping through her notes with that unmistakable grin she often wore when she sensed an opportunity to challenge a guest head-on. Harrison Ford had been invited in to promote his latest film, a booking everyone assumed would be smooth and predictable. A respected actor, a long career, and a loyal fan base usually meant safe ground for daytime TV. No one backstage expected fireworks, let alone an eruption. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the legendary Harrison Ford, Whoopi Goldberg, announced as the audience burst into applause. Ford stepped out with relaxed confidence, acknowledging the crowd with a small wave before taking his seat. His expression carried that familiar calm that had defined him for decades on screen. "Harrison, welcome back to The View," Sarah Haynes said warmly, clearly relieved to have a seasoned guest at the table. "It's always a pleasure having you here." Ford smiled and replied in his gravelly voice, saying he was glad to be there, though he admitted the table had a reputation for tough conversations. The audience laughed, but Joy leaned forward, her eyes sharpening, as if she had been waiting for that exact opening. "Since you mentioned tough questions," she said, "I want to ask about your environmental activism." Her tone shifted instantly. No warmth, no build-up, just a straight shot across the table. "You speak a lot about climate change, AfteHeated," Joy continued, "yet you own multiple aircraft and fly them often." She paused, then delivered the line that changed everything. "Isn't that a little hypocritical?" The smile on Ford's face faded just enough for the cameras to catch it. Ford took a breath before answering, choosing his words carefully. He explained that his aircraft were used for conservation work, transporting researchers and supplies to remote areas where environmental monitoring takes place. He made it clear these weren't leisure trips or casual flights. Joy wasn't interested. She waved her hand dismissively and scoffed, saying that explanation sounded exactly like what wealthy celebrities always say when they get questioned. She implied that with his resources, he could easily find greener alternatives, her tone dripping with accusation. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Sonny Hostin shifted uncomfortably. Alyssa Farah-Griffin looked stunned, and the audience went quiet as the exchange stopped feeling like conversation and started feeling like combat. Ford straightened in his chair, his voice firmer now. He said he had been doing conservation work for over 30 years, funding projects and supporting real efforts on the ground. He explained that some locations simply aren't reachable without aircraft, and that reality couldn't be ignored. Joy laughed, but it wasn't friendly. "Concern?" she said sharply, insisting she wasn't concerned at all. She claimed she was calling him out, accusing Hollywood figures of preaching while living comfortably above the rules they demand others follow. The silence in the studio became heavy. Even Whoopi, usually quick to manage tension, looked momentarily frozen. Ford's eyes hardened as he responded calmly, but decisively, saying Joy was making assumptions about someone she didn't truly know. He clarified that he lived on a ranch, not in a mansion, and that his work wasn't about image or applause. Then he delivered the line that landed like a thunderclap. He said he didn't come on television to attack people or be attacked for entertainment. Joy's face flushed, but instead of easing off, she doubled down. She reminded him how long she'd been in the business and claimed she knew hypocrisy when she saw it. The tone had crossed from sharp questioning into personal territory. "No," Ford replied quietly, cutting straight through the noise. He said what she was doing wasn't journalism at all, just assumptions paired with hostility. The words hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Joy looked stunned for a split second, clearly not expecting that level of pushback. She fired back, insisting she was asking legitimate questions and suggesting that maybe he couldn't handle being challenged. Ford leaned back, his gaze steady, and said he could handle tough questions just fine. What he couldn't accept, he explained, was rudeness, pretending to be accountability. He drew a clear line between honest inquiry and deliberate aggression. The audience was locked in now, barely blinking as the exchange escalated. Joy's hands clenched on the table as she raised her voice, insisting she was being real and that honesty was rare in that town. Ford repeated her words slowly, then challenged her behavior point by point. He accused her of interrupting, making claims without facts and acting as if she had a personal grudge. The tension was now impossible to ignore. Joy denied it through clenched teeth, saying her issue was with celebrities who lectured the public while living differently. Ford responded just as calmly, saying his issue was with hosts who attacked guests and called it entertainment. The room fell into a stunned silence as his words settled over. The table, no laughter, no chatter, just cameras rolling and millions watching as the situation teetered on the edge of something irreversible. Joy's eyes flashed as she hissed that he clearly didn't understand real journalism. She mocked his Hollywood career and implied he was surrounded by praise for too long to recognize criticism. Ford raised an eyebrow slightly, almost amused, and calmly pointed out that decades of interviews had taught him the difference between tough questions and someone picking a fight. And right now, he said, she was picking a fight. Joy shot back that she was searching for honesty, pushing the conversation toward fuel consumption and aircraft use. Before the tension could ease, the exchange moved even closer to the breaking point. The air felt thick as Joy pushed forward, refusing to let the moment breathe even for a second. She leaned in, eyes locked on Ford, pressing him harder as if volume alone could win the exchange. The calm rhythm of the show was completely gone now, replaced by raw tension that made even the studio lights feel harsh. "Let's talk numbers then," Joy snapped, demanding specifics with a sharp edge in her voice. "How much fuel do those planes burn every hour?" She fired the question like a challenge, daring him to hesitate. Ford didn't flinch. He looked at her steadily and answered with exact figures, explaining the fuel use of a smaller aircraft and then acknowledging that larger planes burn more. He spoke clearly, patiently, and without defensiveness, laying out the facts as if he were briefing a room, not fighting for dignity on live television. But Joy wasn't listening to understand. She seized on the numbers immediately, repeating them with a mocking tone and comparing them to how much fuel everyday people use just to get by. Her voice carried a sharp satisfaction, as if she believed she'd finally landed a decisive blow. Ford responded evenly, pointing out that conservation work isn't symbolic talk but real action. He explained that moving equipment, researchers and supplies often replaces multiple vehicles or impossible routes. Then he turned the question back on her, asking calmly how she measured her own environmental footprint. That question hit harder than anything before it. Joy stumbled, visibly thrown off, fumbling to redirect the focus away from herself. She insisted it wasn't about her, claiming she wasn't the one giving speeches or taking public positions. "That's exactly the point," Ford replied, his tone steady but unmistakably firm. He said criticism without self-reflection rings hollow, especially when built on assumptions rather than facts. The audience could feel the shift as the argument tilted away from accusation and toward exposure. Joy's face tightened with rage. She accused him of flipping the narrative and pretending to be something he wasn't. She raised her voice, claiming he was playing a role, an environmental hero image built on privilege. Ford stayed composed, explaining again that he never claimed perfection. He spoke about caring enough to act, funding research, protecting land, and supporting long-term efforts that don't make headlines. His words were measured, but the meaning landed hard. Around the table, the other hosts looked increasingly distressed. Sarah fidgeted with her notes, Sunny avoided eye contact, and Whoopi's face showed clear concern as the exchange drifted far beyond anything controllable. Ford finally admitted he hadn't come there for a confrontation. He said he showed up to discuss a film and share work he cared about, not to be ambushed by hostility. His disappointment was obvious now, no longer hidden behind polite restraint. Joy bristled at the word ambush, her voice cracking slightly as she insisted this was about principle. She framed herself as a truth teller, someone willing to call out Hollywood hypocrisy no matter who sat across from her. Ford answered without raising his voice, saying plainly that this had become personal. He accused her of unloading frustration onto someone who didn't deserve it and said the behavior diminished the show itself. That line landed like a slap. The cameras caught Joy's composure, unraveling in real time. Her face drained, then flushed again, emotions cycling too fast to hide. When she spoke, her voice trembled with anger and disbelief. "How dare you?" she hissed, accusing him of lecturing her in her own workplace. She listed her years in the industry, her experience, her history, demanding recognition and respect. Ford acknowledged he didn't know her personally, but said what he witnessed mattered. He stated clearly that inviting a guest only to humiliate them wasn't professionalism. No matter how long someone had been on television, that was the breaking point. Joy shoved her chair back and stood abruptly, the movement so sudden it rattled the set. Her voice echoed as she declared she didn't have to sit there and be insulted. The audience gasped as she lashed out, calling him a washed-up action star who thought he was superior. Ford remained seated, his expression hardening as he repeated the words calmly, letting their weight speak for itself. Joy spiraled further, gesturing wildly and shouting over the table. She demanded professionalism while completely abandoning it, accusing him of pretending to save the world while burning fuel irresponsibly. Whoopi tried to step in, urging calm and suggesting a reset, but Joy cut her off without even looking. She insisted she wasn't finished and pushed the confrontation even further. Ford finally stood up, his full height commanding instant attention. He spoke clearly and firmly, saying no one was talking down to her. Then came the sentence that visibly shook her. He suggested that if she couldn't hold a civil conversation with guests, maybe she should reconsider whether this was the right job. The words didn't just land, they detonated. Joy froze, then exploded. She screamed back that she had been doing this job longer than most people had been alive. She rattled off the names of leaders she had interviewed, her voice cracking under the weight of her own fury. Ford didn't mirror her volume. He calmly pointed out that experience should come with composure, not public breakdowns. The contrast between their tones made the moment even more brutal. The studio slipped into chaos. Joy sputtered, shouting that he hadn't seen anything yet, threatening escalation while already unraveling on camera. The other hosts looked mortified, some covering their faces, others frozen in shock. Joy declared he needed to hear what she really thought, accusing him outright of fraud and claiming his conservation work was just a publicity performance. The accusation hung heavy as the audience reacted with audible disbelief. Ford tilted his head slightly, studying her with quiet intensity. He pointed out that despite all her shouting, she hadn't asked a single sincere question about the work itself. He accused her of replacing curiosity with prejudice. Joy screamed back that he was the one being condescending and evasive. Ford replied softly that he had answered everything, provided facts, and stayed present while she focused only on attacking. Joy was trembling now, her voice sharp and unstable. She accused him of trying to embarrass her on her own show, but Ford replied with something closer to concern than anger. "You're doing that yourself," he said calmly, and the audience reacted instantly. That single line felt like the final crack in the foundation. Joy pointed at him, shouting that she didn't have to take this. She declared herself done with the interview, done with the disrespect, and done with the show itself. The room went silent, except for her heavy breathing. Sarah asked quietly if she'd heard that correctly, but Joy confirmed it loudly, announcing she was quitting. She ripped off her microphone, the feedback screeching through the studio speakers. She accused the show of choosing arrogant guests over loyalty and respect. Whoopi begged her to stop, to pause, to breathe, but Joy ignored her completely. She slammed the microphone onto the table and declared 30 years of work meant nothing now. Ford finally spoke again, cutting through the chaos with calm authority. He said he never disrespected her, only disagreed and defended himself. He explained the difference clearly, leaving no room for distortion. Joy stood there shaking, the weight of the moment crashing down as the studio watched in stunned silence. Joy stood frozen for a brief second, swaying slightly, as if the reality of what she had just said was finally catching up to her. The studio felt unreal now, like everyone was trapped inside a moment that had gone far beyond television and straight into something raw and irreversible. Her face cycled through shock, anger, and something dangerously close to panic as the room stayed silent. No music, no laughter, no producer voice cutting in, just cameras rolling and millions watching every second unfold. Then, without saying another word, Joy turned sharply and walked off the set. Her footsteps echoed loudly against the floor, each step sounding heavier than the last as she disappeared backstage. The silence she left behind was crushing. The camera lingered on the table, capturing the remaining hosts, sitting in stunned disbelief. Sarah stared straight ahead, visibly shaken, while Sunny avoided the camera entirely. Whoopi sat still, her expression unreadable, clearly trying to process what had just happened, live on air. Harrison Ford slowly sat back down, adjusting his jacket with deliberate calm, as if to ground himself. His composure stood in sharp contrast to the chaos that had just exploded across the set. "Well," Whoopi finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, trying to reclaim control of a show that had clearly slipped through their fingers. "That just happened." Her words felt small compared to the moment. Ford looked toward the camera, his expression serious but controlled. He spoke directly to the viewers, saying he wanted to apologize for what had unfolded. He made it clear that confrontation was never his goal, and that he came simply to talk about his work and clear up misunderstandings. He urged people to look past the shouting and focus on the actual conservation efforts happening around the world. His tone wasn't defensive or triumphant, just steady, as if he were trying to pull the moment back from the brink. Sarah nodded slowly, thanking him for remaining professional despite everything. She admitted moments like this were difficult for everyone involved, especially when emotions spiral out of control. Ford offered a faint smile and said, "Sometimes the most professional thing a person can do is tell the truth and let others decide what they've witnessed." The audience applauded softly, unsure whether they were reacting to relief or disbelief, but the damage was already done. Clips of the meltdown began circulating online within minutes, spreading faster than anyone could contain. Viewers didn't just see an argument, they saw a complete breakdown broadcast in real time. Social media erupted with divided reactions. Some defended Joy fiercely, claiming she had finally said what others were afraid to. Others weren't as forgiving, calling the moment uncomfortable, reckless, and impossible to ignore. What shocked many wasn't just the argument, but how quickly authority collapsed when challenged calmly instead of loudly. The contrast between composure and chaos became the centerpiece of the discussion everywhere. By the end of the day, headlines weren't about the movie, the conservation work, or even the show's topic. They were about one question people couldn't stop asking. How does a veteran host lose control so completely on her own stage? Behind the scenes, rumors swirled instantly. Some claimed the walk-off was emotional, others said it was calculated, while a few insiders whispered that tensions had been building for years, and this was simply the spark. What couldn't be denied was the visual burned into viewers' minds, one person standing calmly under pressure, and another unraveling in front of the entire country. The next morning, reruns played with awkward edits, moments trimmed, pauses shortened, but nothing could erase what people had already seen live. The internet doesn't forget, and neither does the audience. As for Harrison Ford, he left the studio quietly, refusing further comment, letting the footage speak for itself. He didn't gloat, didn't attack, and didn't add fuel to the fire. Joy's future, however, became the subject of non-stop speculation. Was it a temporary exit fueled by emotion, or a career-defining implosion that crossed a line too far to step back from? That question lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling, because once composure cracks on live television, there's no editing it away, no apology that fully resets the moment. And that's why this confrontation didn't just shock viewers. It exposed something deeper about power, ego, and what happens when control disappears in front of millions. In the end, the argument wasn't really about planes, fuel, or conservation at all. It became a public test of restraint versus rage, and only one of those held steady when it mattered most. Whether Joy Behar walked off as a misunderstood truth-teller or as someone who lost control under pressure is still up for debate. But one thing is undeniable: daytime television will never look at confrontations the same way again after that moment.